has predicted that Nigerians would continue to call for restructuring after the new administration assumes office on May 29. Soyinka stated that the government of President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu must renew its focus on the persistent calls for restructuring the Nigerian Federation in order to avoid serious difficulties with its programs and policies. Also, Soyinka denounced the menacing utterances of the vice presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Datti Baba Ahmed, describing it as unbecoming. He further stated that the Nigerian presidency should go to the southeast region in order to heal from the wounds of the civil war.
During that process, if you go all the way back in history, I never heard anyone from any side threaten the judiciary the way I heard it when Mr. Datti was speaking on television when I came. And since then, since that decision, we've also had even the decision of the court, which brought Buhari into power after the decision was given, after he had already been sworn in. And again, while awaiting that decision, I never heard the kind of language, the kind of menacing, blackmailing language as that which was, to which we were treated by Mr. Datti. And that kind of attitude and that kind of go, do or die kind of provocation is not what I think we've all been struggling for. Let me, by the way, take a break. I seem to be on the right line because you haven't interrupted me. As I said, I didn't hear a question properly. Let me introduce myself properly. I happen to be the person who told one of the candidates, former Vice President Atiku, when he was contesting and he came to see me in my office in Ikeja some years ago. He came with Benga Daniel, my former governor of Ogun State. I said to him, listen, it's about time you people left the stage. Why don't you just go away? We need an infusion of fresh blood into this system. But some people, maybe they read it as a bloodletting. No, I said infusion of fresh blood. I said, so I cannot support you. I think your generation should really quit. Right, he wasn't the only one. I then sought out the current president-elect, Ahmed Tinubu, and I gave him exactly the same message. I said, whatever you people are planning, I'm convinced that we need a young generation, new thinking, new sensibilities, new energies. So why don't you just leave this stage? Let's look for somebody, a really brilliant individual, and then you use your influence to catapult that person to power. And this country will see a massive transformation. We spoke for about an hour and a half. In the end, Bola Tinubu said no. He said there were still things which he felt he could contribute. You know, I have not, Bola Tinubu and myself have not met. That's over getting to 5 years ago. We've not met once since. Simultaneously, we called willing and enthusiastic and brilliant young people together, and we said, look, come together, give us a candidate. We'll back that candidate with all our resources. We need somebody else at the helm of affairs. And so, for me, the emergence of the Peter Obi movement is the consequence of events like that, including, as I've stated, the NSARS movement. And all this was done in a democratic spirit. Persuasion, campaigning, mobilizing, sometimes even tutoring prospective candidates. Whether or not my position at the time towards Atiku or Tinubu was correct or not, that's not important. All I'm trying to tell you is to say that we acted out of conviction, and therefore we have absolutely no reason to appear even to be against any new generational possibility, potential when the time for election comes. I have been distressed, however, by this certain aspects of this movement, which for me tended towards the fascistic. And we haven't come this way, all this distance, made all this sacrifice to watch the entire procedure being jeopardized permanently with unpredictable consequences if we get to a situation where threatening, menacing language is being used, where people are beginning to be afraid to talk, to advise, to contribute, simply because there's disagreement over tactics. And so this is what I was objecting to in Datti'S performance. You can't say, give me this mandate. There's also a third person there, as Atiku, for instance. And in any case, the procedure is such that no one can say that we have seen terminus as yet. That's all. That's what I was criticizing. And I was very distressed to see this being reported as if saying, swear this person in, don't swear this person in. No, 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 no. That is a total distortion. And public discourse, I believe, is jeopardized when that kind of misinterpretation is made of something which I have said.
All right, Professor Soyinka, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to ask you, you have said that the statement made by Datti Ahmed is unbecoming. And what some people might want to ask you is, what part of his statement did you find unbecoming? Was it the entirety of his statement, or the fact that he had mentioned, and I quote, because a few things you had said, people feel that it was quite strong, bearing in mind that other actors in this political process have said perhaps even worse things. So it would be good for you to tell us what part of his statement you found unbecoming of a vice presidential candidate. And then the second aspect of this, since you've taken us back to pre-election and you speaking to the principle of front runners in the election process, is your assessment of the election process and the emergence of the president-elect?
Again, I must apologize to you and your audience if I didn't catch your question correctly. I lost about 2/3 of it. But I think I got the drift of what you were saying. And again, let me introduce myself further. I happen to be, again, that individual who, after an election which was massively rigged, who sat in the plane waiting for the final result, the authenticated results to be brought to me. I was on my way to the United States to address a congressional hearing on the Nigerian elections, on those particular elections. And I said to them, the Oshomole people, I said, I will do nothing if I do not have the right documentation, the latest, authenticated in every respect, which I can present to the congressional hearing. It was brought to me from Edo State. It was brought to me while I was seated in the plane before the gates closed. With those documents, I was able to go confidently to Washington, where I met in Amani, by the way, and we joined forces to reverse the thinking of congressional hearing, which was already sold on the false results of the election throughout. The propaganda of the government then in power, I refuse to mention names, was so strong that when we got there, we found a hostile reception. However, armed with those documents, we reversed the thinking of the congressional hearing. Now, this is the kind of person I am. I do my homework thoroughly. I don't like being stampeded. I don't like people making claims which they have not thoroughly investigated and unleashed on the populace. And so when all these claims are going on, please remember, I was away during those elections, but as soon as I came back, having been bombarded right, left, and center by so many comments, links being sent to me, I then pursued my inquiry. And my statement when I did that interview was this, that it's not yet time. The last word has not been spoken on these elections. So do not threaten people and further alienate even those who were on your side from the beginning. That's the message. So when I use the example of Donald Trump, look at him now, a common felon who not only wanted to disrupt the entire system, to reimpose himself on the people, but went further and stormed the Capitol, resulting in some deaths, said, don't use language of incitement, which leads to that kind of result. And I don't care who doesn't want to hear it. I speak the truth. People they can listen, they may not listen, but there are precedents all over the world from which we can learn. And in this particular case, using the American system, it's normal to use, shall we say, models of events to teach ourselves certain various lessons. And so that's it. You know, when I summon Donald Trump, it's simply to tell people, you're beginning to behave like Donald Trump. And that's not very good for democracy in this country. That's all.
But Prof, the fascism that you observe in the conduct of the third force, at least some elements there, were you surprised? Isn't this part of the national character? And can we ever find a cure for Nigerians likely to behave like they are fascists?
Sorry, most of that I missed completely. So it's very difficult for me to even guess the thrust of your...
Okay, I was asking you about fascism. The fascism you criticize in the conduct of certain elements in the emergent third force. Were you surprised, considering the fact that Nigerians tend to behave generally like fascists, whether they are in politics or they are in any other aspect? Can we ever find a cure for that kind of behavior?
Any other acts? Please understand me. Civil action is always justifiable. In any situation of discontent, civil action is always possible. But then we also must be very guarded in our statement, the nature of civil action. If you say we're in a revolutionary state and we need a revolution, if you like, a kind of show or a revolution now, then I understand your language. A particular direction has been plotted. But if we are not in a revolutionary state, if everyone is still observing the procedural aspects of an election, a democratic election, and we're waiting for results, then for heaven's sake, let us complete that process. Don't ask another elected person, whether it's a president or INEC or the ombudsman, if we have it, don't ask them to act unconstitutionally. And don't, above all, don't threaten. Don't use the language of menace. I also want to use this opportunity, I hope you don't mind, to warn your audience, please beware of fake news. A lot of damage is being done by the propagation of fake news. Even as recently as a few days ago, some garbage, some verbiage, some nauseating, praise-singing tract, which we've seen so many times before, has been resurrected and attributed to Wole Soyinka. It makes me sick, and it makes me just want to opt out. I mean, I do not see why this issue, this problem, cannot be solved. If people want to be praise singers, let them please do it in their own and their father's names and leave Soyinka out of it. In fact, things have reached a state, I'm going to go further. You permit me. I want to use this opportunity now to announce a reward. I'm not a rich man, but I'm going to announce a reward. I've looked at my accounts, and I can afford $1,000. $1,000 to anyone who can finger successfully the author of some of the tracts which have been attributed to me over the past 6 months. which we have repudiated again, and again, yet comes out. Other people come out, they say, no. Wole Soyinka never said this. But no, there are those who want to believe it and those who think they're having some traction. So there it is. Permit me to use you as my advertising board, $1,000. I will even go further and try and raise additional funds for anyone who can please relieve us of this incubus of false attribution of fake news. I'm sorry if I've diverged from whatever you asked, but I didn't hear most of it. In any case, all this is involved in the theme which we're addressing this morning.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to my question because I wanted to ask you, in the spirit of debunking fake news, which part of Datti Ahmed's statement did you find unbecoming? Was it the entirety of the statement, of his statement, or a portion of that statement, and which part of it?
It's all very well going back to your question, but it's still going back to the kind of breaks which we had. The transmission is really problematic. It could be my personal problem of hearing. I don't want to blame the equipment completely, but I think we really have a problem. And since you say you had a specific question, this time I don't want to go off on a tangent unless I can hear it very clearly, distinctly.
Okay. All right, I'll repeat the question, and I'll just, if the audience would permit for me to pick the word so you can make it out clearly. I asked, going to your previous response, which part or what part of Senator Datti Ahmed's statement was unbecoming?
Okay. Nearly the totality. Listen, the interviewer asked him several times. He said, what will you do if the Supreme Court judgment is against you? If the interpretation which you are offering about the constitutional aspect of this election, if it is against that of the Supreme Court and they find against you. And he kept saying, no, it's not even open to analysis. Because the word says and it's very clear. And the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, had better give this, in other words, his interpretation. I mean, this is trying to dictate to the supreme arbiter of the nation. Whatever you think of the Supreme Court, it is an institution we all revert to sooner or later. If not today, then tomorrow. If not about this election, maybe about the next election. But Datti kept saying, no, the Supreme Court has got, in its wisdom, to agree with me. That is what is known as fascistic language. It is not acceptable. And for me, it alienates people. It alienates even supporters. I know this for a fact. People come to me, you know how I relate to young people. I relate to those who have found certain problems with the spokespeople of this particular movement. I'm not interested in the other ones. Everybody knows the other movements. But there's a new boy on the block, as the expression stays. And many of us have been waiting for that new kid on the block. And so we have a stake in it. And wherever it seems to be going wrong, we're going to tell the truth to that new kid. And the supporters who also say they have allied thinking with us, that's all. But go and watch that tape all over again. Introduce that tape to any kind of neutral jury, members of whom don't even know anything about the Nigerian situation. Talk about body language, talk about vocal language, talk about the actual text of Datti's pronouncement. This is intimidation, and it's not acceptable. I refuse to be part of that kind of language.
But Prof, you referred recently to restructuring. What kind of restructuring would you like to see?
What kind of what, sorry?
Restructuring of Nigeria would you like to see?
Sorry, Problem again.
I was asking, you've recommended restructuring of Nigeria.
What's the word? What comes after that?
Restructuring. What kind of restructuring?
Instruction?
Restructuring.
Structure.
Restructuring. Restructure.
Yes. What kind of structure?
Restructuring would you like to see?
Of, you mean for the nation?
Yes. Yes, for the nation.
For the nation, I'm talking about decentralization. That's all I want out of the incoming government, whichever it is. Let us have a genuine, not rhetorical, but a genuine, practical, detailed decentralization, the redevolution of powers, more devolution of powers to the various arms, the various tiers of government, state, local government, the reinforcement of civil entities, civil society in the various groupings. That is the kind of structure which I want. You can summarize it in that one word, decentralization. Yes. I don't think we need to even waste much intellectual energy to assess Buhari's tenure, because he's living on a very sour note, a note of sadism. I'm referring to the policy which overnight impoverished millions and millions of Nigerians. You know, the currency change, etc., etc. If he was hoping to go out on a high note, I'm sorry, he will find himself, he has disappointed. That single action has really wiped out the major part of his achievement, because to have embarked on an action like that, and to have attempted, in fact, not just attempted, to have moved to disobey the judgment, the decision of the Supreme Court over the currency validity, is for me a sour legacy to leave to those who believe in democracy and who believe that the primary duty of any leader, any national leader, is the welfare of the people. So whatever, if he's hoping history will be kind to him, his final act in office, I'm afraid, has soured the assessment, the possible positive aspect of the overall assessment. And let me use this opportunity, by the way, to go back to what I said about decentralization. You saw in what happened, the action, the initiative taken by certain governors, you saw decentralization is action, in action. I'm talking about when governors like El Rufai, Akeredolu, Sanwo-Olu in Lagos, and some other governors, I forget which ones now, not only took the government, the central government, to court, but told their people, you ignore the center and obey the decision of the Supreme Court. They said, in our state, the old currency remains valid for as long as the Supreme Court pronounces it so. It said, so forget what the center says. Now, that, for me, is true federalism in action, on behalf of the people and respecting the law of the land. It is that kind of transformation which I look forward to seeing in the activities and the political attitude of whichever government comes in power. Anything short of that, we're just treading the same old sports of centralization in new guises. And that means the economic and political and ideological retardation of this nation.